Every single morning, before the world woke up, one man kept a promise no one asked him to keep.
She had no family left who visited, but somehow a stranger's son had become the closest thing to one.
The very same week his kindness never wavered, his own paycheck was about to disappear.
He had lost his job that morning, but there was one door he refused to stop knocking on. But when the door finally opened, the man staring back at him was the last person on earth he expected to see.
Marcus Cole had exactly $11 in his checking account, a 8-year-old daughter asleep upstairs, and absolutely no idea that the next 2 hours would change both of their lives forever. If you have ever wondered whether kindness still matters in a world that seems to reward everything except kindness, stay until the end of this video, because what happened at that old woman's, Anne's front door, will stay with you long after you close this tab. If this story moves you even a little, do us a favor and hit that like button and subscribe, because we tell stories like this every single week and you will not want to miss the next one. It started, as most quiet acts of goodness do, without any fanfare at all. Marcus Cole was 42 years old, a single father raising his daughter Lily on his own since his wife Renee had passed away from a sudden illness 3 years earlier. He worked the loading dock at Halstead Freight and Logistics, a mid-sized shipping company on the edge of town, hauling crates onto trucks from 4 in the morning until his shift ended at noon. It was not glamorous work, but it paid the bills, mostly, and it left him just enough daylight, hours to pick Lily up from school and help her with her homework at the kitchen table every afternoon. 3 houses down from Marcus lived Eleanor Whitfield, a woman of 78 who had outlived her husband by 11 years and, as far as the neighborhood could tell, had been forgotten by everyone else who once called her family. Her house was small and tidy, the kind of home where every photograph on the wall told a story nobody came around to ask about anymore. Marcus had first knocked on her door 2 winters ago, not because anyone told him to, but because he noticed her struggling to shovel snow off her walkway with hands that shook from arthritis. He took the shovel from her without a word, cleared the path in 15 minutes, and when she offered him $5 for his trouble, he refused it and asked instead if she wanted a cup of tea. She had cried a little that day, though she tried to hide it, and told him nobody had sat with her in her kitchen in over a year. After that, Marcus simply kept showing up. Every single morning before his shift, he would swing by Eleanor's porch just to check that her newspaper had been brought inside, that her porch light still worked, that she had not fallen in the night. Every afternoon, after picking up Lily, the two of them would stop at Eleanor's house for 20 minutes, sometimes longer, so that Lily could show off a drawing from school, or so Eleanor could tell one of her long, winding stories about a life that had once been full of people who no longer called. Marcus fixed her leaking faucet. He drove her to doctor's appointments when her hip made walking difficult. He brought her groceries every Thursday without ever being asked, and when she tried to pay him back, he always waved her off the same way. "You don't owe me anything, Ms. Eleanor. Consider it rent for all that good company." She would laugh every time, though there was always a flicker of sadness behind it, because good company was the one thing she never seemed to have enough of. What Marcus did not know, what nobody on that quiet street knew, was that Eleanor Whitfield had a grandson. His name was Nathaniel Cross, and he happened to be the newly appointed chief executive officer of Halstead Freight and Logistics, the very company where Marcus loaded trucks 6 days a week. Nathaniel had taken his mother's maiden name decades ago, long before Eleanor's son, Nathaniel's father, had a bitter falling out with her over money, pride, and a business deal gone wrong that none of them had ever managed to talk through before he passed away unexpectedly. Nathaniel had been 22 at the time, caught in the middle of a war between 2 people he loved, and he had done what young men sometimes do when grief and anger tangle together. He chose silence. He built his own career from the ground up, changed his professional name to distance himself from a family history that embarrassed him, and slowly let years turn into a decade of no phone calls, no visits, no birthday cards. He told himself, the way people do, that there would always be more time. Halstead Freight had been struggling for 2 quarters straight when the board brought Nathaniel in to turn the company around. He was smart, disciplined, and utterly convinced that the only way to save a sinking company was to cut costs aggressively and immediately. Within his first month, he ordered a full review of every department, and the warehouse and between loading division came back with the highest labor cost relative to output. A list of names was generated by an algorithm nobody in the boardroom fully understood, cross-referenced against attendance records and seniority. Marcus Cole's name appeared near the top, not because he was a poor worker, but because his hourly wage, adjusted for his 10 years of tenure, made him statistically inefficient compared to newer hires. Nathaniel never met Marcus. He never saw his face. He signed off on a list during a rushed afternoon between two other meetings. The way executives sometimes sign away a piece of someone's life without ever knowing it, Marcus found out on a Tuesday. He was called into a small office with beige walls and told, politely and briefly, that his position had been eliminated as part of a company-wide restructuring. He was handed a folder with severance paperwork, thanked for his years of service, and walked out to his car in the parking lot before the shock had even fully settled into his chest. He sat behind the wheel for almost 20 minutes without turning the key, staring at the folder in his lap, doing quiet arithmetic in his head about rent, about Lily's shoes that were getting too small, about the electric bill that was already 2 weeks late. He did not cry. He had trained himself not to, not since Renee died, because crying felt like something he no longer had time for. He simply breathed, gathered himself, and drove to pick up his daughter from school like it was any other day, because that was what you did when you were the only parent left. That afternoon, despite everything, despite the folder still sitting on the passenger seat of his car, Marcus and Lily walked the familiar path to Eleanor's front door. Lily knocked twice, the way she always did, and called out, "Ms. Eleanor, it's us," through the screen door. When Eleanor opened it, her face lit up the way it always did, though something in Marcus's expression made her pause. "You look tired today, dear," she said, studying him the way only someone who has lived a long life can study a person and actually see them. "Long day," Marcus said, forcing a smile, and stepped aside to let Lily run in and show off a paper airplane she had folded during recess. He did not tell Eleanor about the layoff. He told himself it was because he did not want to worry her, but the truth was more complicated than that. Somewhere inside him, showing up at her door and pretending everything was fine was its own kind of medicine. As long as he could still fix her porch light or carry her groceries in from the car, he still felt like a man who was good for something, even on a day when the rest of the world had just told him otherwise. Over the following 2 weeks, Marcus's routine barely changed on the surface, though underneath it, everything had. He spent his mornings, once reserved for work, searching job listings on a cracked phone screen. At the kitchen table, while Lily ate cereal across from him, he applied to 9 different warehouses, 2 delivery companies, and a hardware store 2 towns over. He got 2 callbacks and 0 offers. His severance check, small as it was, went almost entirely toward the past due electric bill and a stack of unpaid medical bills from Renee's, final months that he was still slowly working through 3 years later. He skipped meals some days so Lily would not notice there was less food in the fridge than there used to be. But every single afternoon, without fail, he still walked Lily down to Eleanor's porch, because whatever else was falling apart in his life, that was the one thing he refused to let slip. Eleanor, for her part, began to notice small things. Marcus's car, usually gone by 4 in the morning, was parked in his driveway at odd hours. He mentioned once, in passing, that he was between jobs, and quickly changed the subject before she could ask more. She did not push, because she recognized pride when she saw it. She had worn that same kind of pride herself for years, refusing to admit how lonely her big empty house had become. One rainy Thursday, Eleanor asked Marcus to help her go through a box of old photographs in the attic, something she said she had been meaning to do for years. Among faded pictures of a wedding, a small boy on a bicycle, and a Christmas long gone, she pulled out a photograph of a young man in his early 20s, unsmiling, standing beside a car. "That's my grandson," she said quietly, running her thumb over the edge of the photo. "Nathaniel. Haven't heard his voice in almost 11 years now," she explained, in the careful, measured way people explain old wounds they have grown used to carrying, that there had been a falling out after her son's death, that pride and grief had gotten tangled together until nobody could untangle them anymore, and that she had written to Nathaniel every Christmas for a decade, without ever once receiving a reply. "I don't even know what he looks like now," she admitted. "Whether he's happy, whether he thinks of me at all." Marcus said nothing for a long moment, only placed his hand gently over hers on top of the photograph. "Family's a strange thing," he finally said. "Sometimes the people who love us most are the worst at showing it." He thought, though he did not say it aloud, of his own daughter, of how much he wished he could give her more than he currently could, of how much unspoken love could sit quietly behind a closed door for years without ever finding its way out. Meanwhile, across town, in an office on the 14th floor of Halstead Freight's headquarters, Nathaniel Cross was discovering that turning a company around on paper was far easier than turning it around in practice. The layoffs, meant to stabilize the balance sheet, had instead crushed morale so completely that productivity dropped further, and two of his best regional managers quietly resigned within a month. Sitting alone in his office late one evening, staring at a spreadsheet full of numbers that no longer meant what he thought they meant, Nathaniel found himself thinking, unexpectedly, of his grandmother. He did not know exactly why. Perhaps it was the quiet of the building at night, or the loneliness of eating dinner alone at his desk for the fourth night that week, or simply the slow accumulation of years finally catching up to him all at once. He opened a drawer in his desk, one he rarely touched, and found an unopened Christmas card from 3 years ago, the last one Eleanor had sent before he had moved and stopped forwarding his mail from the old address. He held it in his hands for a long time before finally, almost involuntarily, tearing it open. Inside, in Eleanor's careful, slightly shaking handwriting, was a short note. "Wherever you are, whatever happened between us, I hope you know the door is always open. Love always, Grandma." Nathaniel sat in the dark office for nearly an hour after reading it, something loosening in his chest that he had kept locked tight for over a decade. The next morning, for the first time in 11 years, he requested his grandmother's current address from an old family contact and told his assistant to clear his schedule for a personal matter that Friday. He did not call ahead. Some part of him, the part still governed by pride, even after everything, wanted to simply show up, the way he imagined a better grandson might have done years earlier, and hope that it was not too late. That same Friday morning, Marcus received a callback from a regional distribution center 2 towns over, offering him a trial shift for the following Monday. It was not much, but it was something, the first real flicker of hope in weeks, and he allowed himself, for the first time since the layoff, to breathe a little easier. He picked Lily up from school that afternoon in slightly better spirits than he had felt in a long time, and the two of them made their usual walk down to Eleanor's house, Lily chattering about a spelling test, while Marcus carried a bag of groceries he had picked up along the way, bread, soup, the tea Eleanor liked, bought with money he genuinely could not spare, though he never once considered not buying it. He let himself in with the spare key, the way he always did, calling out, "Ms. Eleanor, it's just us," as he set the groceries on the kitchen counter. Eleanor was resting in her armchair in the living room, and Marcus knelt beside her the way he had 100 times before, checking that she had taken her afternoon medication, adjusting the blanket over her knees, listening to her recount a dream she'd had the night before about a garden she used to keep as a young woman. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug nearby, showing Eleanor her spelling test with a proud, gap-toothed smile. It was in the middle of this quiet, ordinary moment, a moment that had repeated itself in some form nearly every day for 2 years, that a car pulled into Eleanor's driveway outside. Marcus glanced through the window, curious, since Eleanor rarely had visitors, and watched as a man in an expensive dark suit stepped out of a black sedan, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the front porch with the stiff, uncertain posture of someone approaching a place he was not sure he was welcome in anymore. There was a knock at the door. "Would you get that for me, dear?" Eleanor asked, not thinking much of it, assuming it was perhaps a delivery or a neighbor. Marcus rose, walked to the front door, and pulled it open. For a long, frozen second, neither man said a single word. Marcus recognized him instantly, the same face from the boardroom 2 weeks earlier, the same man who had sat at the head of the table the day Marcus was let go, though Marcus had only glimpsed him briefly through a half-open door as executives filed past him in the hallway that, no, Nathaniel, for his part, stared back at the man standing inside his grandmother's house with an expression of complete and utter confusion, his mind struggling to reconcile why an employee he had helped lay off 2 weeks earlier was standing in the doorway of a home he had not entered in 11 years. "Can I help you?" Marcus finally managed, his voice careful, guarded. "I'm here to see my grandmother," Nathaniel said slowly, his eyes flicking past Marcus into the living room, where he could just make out the shape of an elderly woman rising slowly from an armchair, steadying herself against its arm. "Eleanor Whitfield. I'm Nathaniel." He paused, studying Marcus's face again, something clicking into place. You worked at Halstead. Loading dock. I remember your file." His voice trailed off as the full weight of the coincidence settled over him. Eleanor appeared behind Marcus then, one hand pressed to her chest, her eyes filling instantly in with tears at the sight of the grown man standing on her porch. The same little boy who used to ride Grace's bicycle up her driveway. Now a stranger in an expensive suit who somehow still had the same eyes she remembered. "Nathaniel," she whispered, and the single word carried 11 years of longing inside it. What followed was not the tense, dramatic confrontation one might expect between a man and the executive who had fired him. Instead, standing in that doorway, all three of them seemed to understand, almost instantly, that something larger than any of their individual stories had brought them together in that their exact moment. Eleanor, moving with surprising speed for a woman her age, reached past Marcus and pulled her grandson into the house, into her arms, sobbing openly now, repeating his name like a woman who could not quite believe it was real. Nathaniel, to his own visible surprise, held onto her just as tightly, his composed executive posture crumbling into something far more human. Marcus stood back, unsure of his place in the moment, and quietly began gathering Lily's things, assuming this was a private family reunion he had no business witnessing. But Eleanor, even through her tears, reached out and caught his sleeve. "Don't you dare leave," she said, laughing and crying at once. "Nathaniel, this man has been checking on me every single day for 2 years. Groceries, doctor's visits. He fixed my porch light with his own hands. He never once asked for anything in return, not even when I begged him to let me pay him back." She turned to Marcus, her hand still gripping his sleeve. "This is my grandson, the one I told you about." Nathaniel's eyes moved slowly from his grandmother to Marcus, and something in his expression shifted, the careful, guarded posture of a man used to reviewing spreadsheets and cutting costs giving way, for just a moment, to something closer to shame. He knew, instantly and completely, the kind of man standing in front of him, the kind of man whose name had appeared as a single row in a spreadsheet, reduced to a labor cost efficiency ratio, while in reality, he had spent every single day of those same 2 weeks quietly showing up for a woman with no one else left in the world to show up for her. "I didn't know," Nathaniel said quietly, and it was not entirely clear whether he meant that he hadn't known about the layoff's impact, or about his grandmother's loneliness, or about the strange, invisible threads that had, apparently, been connecting all three of their lives without any of them realizing it. "Most people don't," Marcus said, not unkindly, though there was an honesty in his voice that landed heavier than any accusation could have. That evening turned into something none of them had expected. Eleanor insisted everyone stay for dinner, refusing to let the moment end so soon after finding it. Over a simple meal of soup and bread at her small kitchen table, Nathaniel listened, really listened, for what felt like the first time in years, as his grandmother spoke about the loneliness of the past decade, about the Christmas cards that went unanswered, about how Marcus's daily visits had, in her words, kept an old woman's heart beating a little longer than it might have otherwise. He watched Lily show Eleanor another drawing, watched Marcus quietly help clear the dishes without being asked, watched the easy, unforced affection between this man, his grandmother, and a little girl who was not even his own blood, and he understood, with a clarity that startled him, exactly how much he had been missing while he built a career, and designed entirely around efficiency and numbers. Before he left that night, Nathaniel asked Marcus to walk with him out to his car. Standing in the driveway under the porch light Marcus himself had once repaired, Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not just for the layoff, though I owe you that too. The system flagged your name because of a formula, And I signed off on it without ever seeing your face. That's on me. But I also owe you something bigger, and I don't think I can put it into words yet." He paused, glancing back at the lit window of his grandmother's kitchen. "You gave her back to me. I don't know how to repay that." "You don't repay family," Marcus said simply. "You just show up." That's all she ever wanted from any of it. Nathaniel nodded slowly, something settling behind his eyes. "Come by my office Monday morning," he said. "Not for an apology, for a job. A real one, not the one you had before. Something better. I mean that." Marcus, ever cautious, ever wary of promises made in emotional moments that might not survive the light of day, simply nodded and said he would think about it. But Monday morning, Nathaniel kept his word. Marcus was offered a newly created position overseeing warehouse operations and staff welfare, a role Nathaniel insisted on creating specifically because, as he put it in the meeting, "We clearly need someone in this company who actually understands what it costs a person to lose their job, so we stop treating people like line items." The pay was nearly double what Marcus had made before, and for the first time in 3 years, he did not have to choose between groceries and medical bills. But the real change was not the job. In the months that followed, Nathaniel visited his grandmother every single weekend, sometimes bringing Marcus and Lily along, the four of them slowly becoming something that resembled a family stitched back together from pieces that had been scattered for over a decade. Eleanor's house, once quiet and full of unanswered Christmas cards, filled again with noise. Lily's laughter, Nathaniel's slowly returning warmth, Marcus's steady, patient presence anchoring it all together. Marcus never set out to change anyone's life. He simply refused to stop knocking on a lonely woman's door, day after day, even when his own world was falling apart behind him. And in the end, that single, quiet, unglamorous act of showing up, the kind of kindness that never once expected anything in return, was the very thing that opened a door none of them ever could be opened again. Sometimes the smallest, most ordinary kindness we offer someone else turns out to be the very thing that saves us in return, long before we ever see it coming. If this story reminded you that kindness is never wasted, even when no one is watching, share it with someone who needs to hear that today, and subscribe for more stories like this one every week.